Welcome to Draw This. In this Tuesday's episode, we're going to draw an alien. Okay, so I'm going to start out using Poser 10. I have one of the default models here. It's kind of an interesting looking mannequin, and I'm going to use it as a human template to build my alien. I'm going to change the camera view to the front. That way you're looking at it from front on. Then if you want to change the lighting, you can of course change the lighting down in the left corner there. I think that looks pretty good. And then we're going to go to render settings, and change the render size to something a little bit larger than the default. So you get a nice large render. Then you want to click from manual settings to auto settings, and I like to set it to final. That's a pretty good setting. It'll take a little while to render. Give it some time, and then you'll get something like this. Now you'll have to kind of pan around to be able to see what your render looks like. Give it a once over. If it looks good, go ahead and click in the top right and choose export image. Save that as a PNG or whatever file format you like, and then load it into Painter. You can go ahead and turn the background on or off if you like, or you can fill it with a color. I'm going to fill it with gray so that's easier to see. And then I'm going to turn down the opacity of the model layer. Just going to use this as a guide to get the general humanoid proportions, but what I draw over it's going to be completely different. I'm going to create a new layer for a sketch and use the detail oils along with black to go ahead and sketch. I'm going to turn on Symmetry or mirror painting, and I'm going to just start to sketch out my alien character here. I want it to look loosely like a human, but also look like an alien so that you can definitely tell it's an alien. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to use it to keep my fill inside of those outlines. So you want to make sure all your lines are pretty closed. You can select the paint bucket and white and click. If your paint goes outside onto your background, then you may have to do this a slightly different way. What you'll have to do is use the magic wand to select the background. Make sure it's selected everything, and then go ahead and choose select invert selection. That turns the selection inside out. And now if you fill, it should automatically fill in your lines without you having to go through and do it by hand. You will have to erase some areas, and it is going to leave a little white edge around everything, which is not going to look good when you print or when you zoom in. So we will have to take care of that near the end of this composition in Photoshop. I'm going to duplicate the lines again a few times just to darken them up a little bit and make them bolder, and then I'm going to merge them with Control E. Then I'm going to make a selection from the fill layer. I'm going to do that using Select Layer Content. That puts a selection around the fill, and now if I create a new layer, whatever I paint will stay within that selection. So I'm going to name this new layer Dark. This is going to be some of the dark values to help me build up the form. I'm going to change the composite method to multiply and pick kind of a medium gray color. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and then I'm going to just go ahead and choose fill to fill this whole selection with that gray. Then I'm going to select the airbrush and choose white, and white on a multiply composite method layer will basically erase that dark color. So we're going to use this to build up the form very quickly. We can go ahead and reduce the opacity of that layer so that it's not so dark. Now we have a pretty decent looking form. Let's create a new layer, and let's call this layer Mid. We'll choose multiply for the composite method, and we'll choose a lighter gray in the scratch board, and we'll go ahead and fill in some of these inset areas, like on the collar here. Anywhere where we want to add a little bit of a shadow, a little bit of a contour, and just enhance the form, we'll go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to add more dark overall using the airbrush with a pretty big brush. We're going to have our light coming from the left side, so I'm going to make the right side a little bit darker overall. And I'm going to use white along the edges with the edge of the brush to make a little bit of a reflection. That'll help everything look nice and curved. I'll create a new layer, and we'll call it light gray. This will be an even lighter gray that we'll put in, and we'll go ahead and use the airbrush for that. I'm going to make it a multiply composite method as well, and just go ahead and paint over everything a little bit to just gray everything down. And like I did before, I'm going to add some lights back on top. But this time I'll do it on a new layer. I like to use a lot of layers because it just gives me lots of flexibility and makes it easier to experiment. I'll use the scratch board tool, and I'll go ahead and add in some bright highlight areas. You can see that I'm kind of working back and forth between light and dark, just kind of however I feel like working. I don't always work the same way. Sometimes it's just kind of spontaneous, especially when I'm painting something like this that's conceptual and I have no idea what I'm going to paint from the beginning. I created a new layer there for light 2. This will be another light layer, and I'm going to use the airbrush for this and try to just keep building up the form These are the nice shiny reflective areas, keeping them concentrated mostly on the left side where the light is. I'll create a new layer for the dark. This will be dark 2. It'll be a multiply composite method. Pick a dark color. I'm using multiply composite methods for my shadows. I'm using screen composite methods for my highlights. So I'm just enhancing those dark areas and making them a little bit darker overall, just trying to add a lot of nice contrast. I'll go back to the white layer and add a little more white. Again, just kind of going back and forth until I'm satisfied with the results that I get. And a lot of this is really experimenting. You know, I've never painted this alien before, so I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of guessing. I blended a little bit using diffuse blur, and then I went ahead and grouped all the layers of the value together. I'm going to create a new color layer and make that a multiply composite method. And we'll go ahead and fill it with a lime green. I'm going to go ahead and add an additional color of a slightly different green color using the chalk. And I'll use the organismal paper that is called polypay wool. And with a big brush and the paper size and contrast turned up, I'll get this nice kind of camouflage pattern. I'm just painting over it back and forth until it's nice and noticeable. Then I'm going to turn down the opacity of that whole layer to where it's just a subtle blend. I'll create a second layer of color. Maybe this time I'll use something like this violet color, and we'll go ahead and fill in the hair, or whatever these are, tentacles, I'm not sure, it's an alien, so your guess is as good as mine. And once I get those filled in, I'll go ahead and make it a multiply composite method so it blends a little better. And then I'll use a slightly lighter violet color to add some highlights to the hair or the tentacles. And that just helps them stand out and look more three-dimensional. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer for a third color. And let's go with another kind of, maybe blue this time. And we'll make this a multiply composite method. Go ahead and fill in the mouth, or whatever this is, on this alien character. I'm going to fill in a little bit of the face here. These are maybe some gills or something, some kind of breathing organ. And I'll add a little bit of a light blue, maybe to the eyes here. That'll just kind of help them stand out. I want this to look kind of like a concept character or something. Maybe this is something that could be used to later make a 3D model or a character for a video game or a comic book. It's nice to do this front-on view. Now that we're not drawing symmetrically anymore, it's okay to go ahead and crop this a little bit, so I use the crop tool for that. And then I'm going to go ahead and just group all of the color layers together, just like I did with the value layers, to help tidy up my layers palette. I'm going to go to the background, and let's add some background color now. I'll pick a dark blue and just fill everything. And then you'll really start to notice now, if you zoom in, that there's this really horrible white edge around all of your selection here. So I'm going to open this in Photoshop. I saved it as a PSD. Next, I'll group the fills together. I'll select the lines layer and use the magic wand to select the background. I'll create a mask on the fills layer, and I will invert it. Then I'll choose mask edge. I'll shift the edge a little bit to remove that white fringe, and then click OK. And now if we disable and re-enable the mask, you can see a before and after. It does a really good job of removing that fringe. I'm just going to save this as a copy. Then I'm going to merge the fill layers with Control E. Then I'm going to right click on the layer mask and choose Apply Layer Mask. And I'm going to go ahead and save this and open it in Painter again. Now we can go ahead and touch this up a little more. I'm going to color the background with the airbrush. I'm going to start with a dark color over on the dark side, away from the light. I'm going to sample the background color and make it lighter. I'm going to have maybe these light streaks that kind of come from the top left down. I'll put in a little bit of this pink magenta color just to give it some flavor. Maybe I'll darken it a little bit more using a dark blue. The airbrush with a large airbrush works really well to get these nice smooth transitions. I'll add a lighter streak, kind of like a ray of light. Something like that. Looks pretty good. It kind of helps it look like a sci-fi background. Let's get a selection from our fills layer again. And we'll go ahead and add a new layer. We'll make it a multiply composite method, and we'll use the airbrush to put in some of that purple color from the background over everything. That'll really help this lighting look more realistic. So just painting over everything, add a little bit of that blue color as well, and now everything has a nice tint and a nice flavor to it. And just like we did last time, since this is a multiply composite method, we can use white to conceal some of that shadow that we put on. So this really helps it look more realistic, like it's in a real lighting environment, and it helps to further establish the form of the character and help it look more three-dimensional. I'm going to choose Select None to get rid of the selection, and then I'll use a little bit of a light pink in the background to add a little bit of a backlight using the airbrush. This just kind of helps it pop out and gives the edges more contrast in the dark areas. I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit of that layer 1, which is that shadow layer that's on top of everything. We'll add a new layer for a glow. We'll make it a screen composite method, and we'll choose the airbrush. We'll use one of these lime colors from the skin, and here and there we'll add a little bit of a glow to help the skin look maybe more metallic or more reflective. I'm going to get another selection from the fills, and let's add a layer for texture. Texture layers are most often a multiply composite method, so I'm going to change it to that. I'll pick maybe a dark orange and use the sponge to create a nice fractal pattern over the skin. Kind of maybe it looks like blood vessels or something. I'll use a teal in combination with that. And then I'll go ahead and reduce the opacity of that layer so that it blends into the skin a little more subtly. If we zoom in, we can see it looks kind of cool and very alien. Let's create a new layer for highlights. These will be some very bright highlights. We'll use the glow brush and a screen composite method. We'll go ahead and use a very light blue to go ahead and paint along the edges. This will again help everything look a little more shiny. And then here and there I'll blend using the diffuse blur if the edges are too sharp. It works really well to soften everything and make it look nice and smooth. If you want things to look a little sharper and more metallic, you can use the Distorto brush or any of the distortion brushes to help sharpen the edges. I think that helps. Let's add a new layer for tinting. We'll make that an overlay composite method. And let's use a teal color. We'll fill everything with that. And then we'll go ahead and use the airbrush along with a mask to mask out some of that tinting. The mask kind of conceals the areas where you paint with black. And so we get a nice blend there. Let's try that again on another layer. Set it to overlay again. This time we'll use a magenta color. We'll fill, and then we'll add a mask to that layer. We'll use black with the airbrush to conceal a little bit of that color. Now we have a nice blend of the two colors together. We'll go ahead and do a drop all. We don't need those layers anymore. And we will save a copy. We'll do select all, copy, paste in place to make a duplicate. And then I'll choose Effects, Tonal Control, Equalize. This will help make this a little bit brighter. I'll choose Auto Set. That usually does a pretty good job. And then click OK. We'll create a new layer. We'll make it a screen composite method. We'll select white and we'll use the airbrush to go ahead and put in a little bit of a light glow on our light side. Again, this kind of helps everything look a little more real. Let's create another new layer and we'll make it a multiply composite method. We'll use a dark blue to go ahead and vignette the corner to add a little more shadow. Because I want this, although it's a kind of a comic style line drawing, I still want it to look a little more painterly and realistic. I'll reduce the opacity to get a more subtle blend for the shadow. Do another drop all, and then do all copy paste again to create another duplicate of my art. We'll choose Effects, Focus, Soften, and I'll go ahead and just soften this a little bit. And just like we did with the tinting, we can go ahead and add a mask to that layer, and we can mask out a little bit of that blur, which kind of gives it like a photographic focal effect. I find this adds another level of realism to the piece. Once you're done with that, you can go ahead and drop all again. And we'll zoom in to see if we like this. I think we have a finished alien. If you enjoyed this episode of Draw This, I have new episodes every Tuesday. Don't forget to click the like button and click the subscribe button to get updates when I release new videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.